My dear friends, the readings for the 22nd Sunday in the ordinary time year A focus on the natural longing for God. Each one of us is unique and each of us are called for different purposes. However, some of us, like Jeremiah, keep complaining, and like Peter, some of us present ourselves obstacles and wet blankets on the part of others who are making disparate efforts to respond to God's call. To be disciple of God, we need to go through some challenges in life. In spite of knowing all this, are we willing to do what it takes to be a disciple? The first reading of this Sunday, the lamentation of Jeremiah, the weeping prophet, was that of disappointment. The ordeal of the weeping prophet tells us that nothing can prevent the word of God from being proclaimed, not even our own reluctance or resistance. Though Jeremiah resisted, yet he submitted to God. He was no longer in charge of himself. Rather, the word of God burns like the fire in him. The Jeremiah, who was very timid and did not know how to speak, is now a hammer in God's hand. There is much mystery in God. Sometimes we live under the assumption that if we do the will of God, we will be healthy, wealthy, and loved by all. But that is not always true. Faithfulness to God at times brings suffering, trials, disappointments. He allows us to experience the horrific pains. However, in spite of all this, He blesses us and safeguards us. The second reading of today invites us to offer our totality to God. This means that the sacrifice we must offer ourselves to God must not be a dead one like the sacrifice of Cain, but it must be a fitting sacrifice to God. Offering ourselves to God, according to Paul, means a continuous exercise every day and every time of our life. Many of us hold back from surrendering all to Jesus because we fear that it will bring terrible consequences. Our action seems to say, I surrender some, instead of I surrender all to Jesus. Let us surrender to Him so that we may become the useful instruments in His mission. In the Gospel of today, we hear the irony of Peter. The same Peter who proclaimed Jesus as the Christ just last week is now being referred to as a Satan. Why would Jesus speak to him so harshly after extending the keys to the kingdom to Peter just a few verses before? The answer is quite simple. Peter didn't understand the mission of Jesus, laying down and offering his life for his flock. The messianic mission was unacceptable to Peter and other disciples of Jesus. How would anyone imagine that the Son of God has to lay down his life and be killed? Eventually, he has to undergo all the sufferings and death until he rose again in glory. Dear friends, let us ask ourselves, how do I respond to God's call? Do I unite with Him in times of suffering, or do I blame Him for all the challenges in life? Unless we surrender ourselves to God, we won't understand His call. Each of us is called for different vocations. Some to be parents, some to be leaders in different segments. Often we exaggerate our problems and fail to enjoy our vocation. Let us realize that the life is not a bed of roses. Once there was a man who was suffering lots. While sleeping, he dreamt walking with Jesus in the seashore. While he noticed only a pair of footprints, he complained to Jesus, asking why Jesus did not accompany him in times of suffering. Jesus replied, "My son, the footprints you saw were mine. I carried you on my shoulder." My dear friends, Jesus never leaves us alone in our suffering, but share with us our suffering He carries on Him. He is always with us. Let us be aware that when we feel left alone and see only a pair of footprints in times of our struggles, there is God who carries us. Let us feel safe in God's hand. May God bless you and a blessed Sunday.